All right, it's a little bit after 7 o'clock, so we'll get going. May I please call to order the regular meeting of the Morristown Township Board of Education. The meeting was called in conformance with the Open Public Meetings Act with adequate notice as provided in the Courier Post in Burlington County Times on June 30th, 2023. May I please get a moment of silence? Please rise for the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Would you take roll call, please, James?
Miss Arcaro Burns. Mrs. Barnes. Mrs. Fowles Macaluso. Dr. Myatt. Mrs. Miller. Miss Morano. Mr. Weeks.
Present.
Mrs. McCopolis.
Here.
Mr. Villanueva.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I please get a motion for the approval of the minutes from our February 20th, 2024 meeting, both the executive and regular session?
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? Mick, abstain, okay. And we will start off again with our student board representative reports. Thank you for being here tonight. And Lily, why don't we start with the freshman report?
Hello, board members, parents, teachers, and fellow students. At the high school, we have an exciting service project for this March, April, and May. In February, we organized and carried out the Learning and Opportunities Fair, or Love Fair, at MHS, where we invited a plethora of volunteer organizations for students to explore. The goal of this was to show students all of the amazing available volunteer opportunities to hopefully encourage some of them to become involved in the community. To further this initiative, Student Council is planning to hold drives, and fundraisers for a couple nonprofits that attended. We have chosen to work with Urban Promise, which is an incredible organization based in Camden that is dedicated to enriching the lives of students in Camden, and the Morristown Volunteer Fire Department, our local fire department committed to keeping our community safe. We are planning to hold a snack drive for Urban Promise's after school program in late April and a car wash to raise funds for the fire department. I think I speak for all of student council when I say that we are all eager to give back to our community in this way. Thank you.
Thank you. Sophia, the sophomore report.
Good evening, Board of Education. My name is Sophia Baram, and I'm one of your sophomore class liaisons. So one thing that Student Council has planned for this spring that we started last year is a tour of the high school to alumni. The alumni come back to MHS, are interested to see how different the high school is now compared to what it looked like when they were there and just what is currently going on. You may recall that we gave a tour to the class of 1973 last year for their 50th anniversary. This year, on May 18th, we will host alumni from Morristown High School's class of 1974, who reached out to us requesting a tour after it was such a success last year. This year, the tour will be given by freshmen and sophomores since it will be held during prom weekend. First, we start with a short video of some of their yearbook memories, and then we will give small groups of alumni a tour around the school, showing the groups new additions to MHS that weren't there when they were students, and explain some of the activities and events currently happening. The tour starts at the main entrance and then takes everyone throughout the whole school, and the students explain the classes offered in every hallway, the library and IT room, the Star Center, and the newer edition of the MAC. To conclude, we love giving these tours and having the ability to share this experience with the alumni, and we are hopeful to say that we have started a new tradition here at MHS. Thank you, and I'm now passing it on to your junior class liaison, Kyle.
Thank you.
Good evening, board, teachers, parents, and fellow students. At Morristown High School, spring is in the air, and that can only mean one thing: prom. Prom is going to be on May 17th at the Aquarium in Camden, just about 2 months from today. However, pre-prom preparations and festivities are already underway. This Thursday, our class is hosting a fundraiser at the Chick-fil-A in Centerton Square to raise money for the prom. The money raised will go to add-on experiences such as Touch a Shark and the Shark Tunnel photo ops. I know I would love to have a prom picture with a shark in the background. So if you can, please come to Chick-fil-A between 5 and 8. It would be really appreciated. We also will be hosting our prom fashion show, where local formal wear establishments dress some of us up to show off their clothes. Us juniors will stroll around the cafeteria in our best prom gear, showing off our style to the whole school. Now, I could talk about prom all day, but there is something more important that I'd like to discuss. As some of you know, the board recently formed a committee to promote diversity, inclusion, culture, and equity, or the DICE committee for short. We have been working on solutions to improve diversity and equity in the school. So far, we have identified the discrepancies in our inclusion programs using data and are finding solutions to these issues. We have talked about bringing in outside groups to do student trainings, and we have also thought about making a diversity calendar. This calendar would show off a wide range of cultural holidays that are relevant to all of our students. So thank you for your time, and Bavika has a very special announcement for us.
Thank you.
Good evening, all. I am Bhavika, the senior class liaison. And first, I would like to start off with my regular report and then make a special announcement. So for my regular report, I would like to talk about the Disney trip. So our senior class trip took place from March 9th to March 14th, and we went to sunny Orlando, to Disney World and Universal. So the last time I was here, I was hopeful that the Spirit flight would not get delayed, but I stand corrected. I was on the Spirit flight and it was delayed a couple hours, so not too bad. The real issue was for one of the United flights, which ended up landing at 3:30 a.m. at Pop Century Resort. However, despite these tiny hiccups, this trip was certainly memorable and one of the highlights of my senior year. I have to admit, though, I really do miss the Florida weather. Even though I was melting outside the line for Rise of Resistance, I would take that and some palm trees any day over our weather. Most of my trip was spent waiting in lines. I spent 3 hours in line for Rise of Resistance, but every second was worth it. The trip was a bonding experience for my friends, and I even made some new friendships. I'm truly grateful that our school can provide seniors with this trip, and I would like to thank all of our chaperones and administrators that helped plan the trip and accompanied us. So that's all I have for us seniors for now. It's smooth sailing until prom. For the next part of my presentation, I would like to invite the rest of Student Council. All right. I stand before you all today, joined by my fellow members of the MHS Student Council, to present a token of our support to our beloved teacher, Mrs. Furlong. Mrs. Furlong is a special education teacher at MHS and a former student council advisor for my class, the class of 2024. In August 2023, our community was deeply affected by the sudden and heartbreaking loss of Mrs. Furlong's son, Adam Furlong. Adam was a talented, dedicated, and accomplished high schooler. He had earned a scholarship to the University of New Haven for the music and sound recording program. Along with music, he excelled at sports, especially track and field. He was a very talented pole vaulter. This school year, MHS has rallied together to both honor Adam's memory and express our support for Mrs. Furlong, a teacher who has given so much to our community. She has been a teacher, mentor, supporter, and a driving force behind numerous volunteering initiatives, dedicating hours to setting up donation drives and spending time with rescue dogs through her role in the nonprofit Wolf Love Rescue. Mrs. Furlong is also an original unified sports coach for soccer, basketball, and track. Through various fundraising initiatives, including penny wars and t-shirt sales, the MHS community has raised $1,000, and these proceeds will be donated to the Adam J. Furlong Memorial Fund. On behalf of MHS Student Council, students, staff, and administrators, I would like to express that this gesture symbolizes our deep gratitude and unwavering support for Mr. and Mrs. Furlong. We are ready to stand with you every step of the way, Mrs. Furlong, and sincerely hope that we have been able to make a difference. Thank you.
Take a deep breath. I just want to thank you guys so much for all your support. It's been a really difficult road for my husband and I, but knowing that I have you guys at school every single day and I see your smiling faces, it really makes it a lot better for me to know. But I also want you guys to know that the scholarship money that we're doing, it's going back to kids just like you guys. And this is our first year giving it out, and it's going to be to a student for track and a student for music. And we're hoping to continue this, and this is a good start for his scholarship so we can keep his name and his memory and things that he was passionate about moving forward. But I just really want to thank you guys for all your support, your text messages, your emails, and, you know, everything that you guys have done for my husband and I and our family. So thank you.
Okay, in addition to that donation,
The staff at the high school also collected $1,500 to also add to the Adam J. Furlong Memorial Fund, with all of our love and our hearts for Anne. What they didn't say is that she was a class advisor to the senior class. So there's a special bond there that she has with them. And when I tell you that Anne is the bright shining light of many people's lives at the high school, I'm not underestimating that. I'm not exaggerating at all, considering I'm probably the opposite of the bright shining light. I feel complete to say that. And I don't know what I would do without Anne personally. And I know several other people feel that way. So I'm so glad she's back, but I also know how hard it is. So this is for you.
And I want to thank all my teacher friends who are here, because when we were going through this, my friends are like, how are you going to go back to work? And I'm able to go back to work because of all these students up here and all the students at Morristown and all the support that we've gotten, not only from the board, but also from my colleagues at school, because they're more than colleagues, they're our friends and family. So thank you guys so much. And thank you guys.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for all the student reps for coming this evening. And thank you, Bhavika, for your kind words and for letting us all know. It's a great example of, how this community supports each other, our staff support our students, and it's really wonderful to see the students supporting the staff. I know that you do it in many, many ways, but to do it in this particular instance is really moving. So thank you for starting that initiative and getting that going to honor Adam's memory. So thank you very much. That was special. You all know the drill. You're free to stay. You're free to leave. But thank you again for your reports. Okay. So you may have noticed that Mr. Bollendorf isn't here today. Unfortunately, he had a death in the family. His mother-in-law unfortunately passed away, so he is unable to make it this evening. Please keep Joe, his wife Eleanor, and their family in your thoughts. A few updates that I wanted to share. We've, as most people know, we have been in a lot of discussions about a potential capital referendum to potentially increase the size and capacity of our schools. And there's been a lot of discussion about that. As you may know, we have a new architect as of this year. Freytech is the name of the company that is undergoing and continues to undergo a lot of due diligence in terms of looking at our spaces and where there may be capacity to grow in terms of construction. We expect that a representative from the Freytech firm will be at our next board meeting in April and will give a presentation on where things have been, where things are, and where we expect things to go in terms of a timeline, a plan, not a concrete plan in terms of this is the exact project that we expect to do, because we do not know that yet. And I don't think we would be in a position by April to make any sort of proposal or put anything out detailed about what the potential construction could look like, because we haven't seen anything yet. But that will hopefully provide the community with an update on where we are and what to expect in the coming months, if not year or so, in terms of a timeline. And so we look forward to that presentation. I think the board committees over the course of the next month will get a preview of some of the content of that presentation. So the way that it will be structured, I think all of the board members will have an opportunity to hear from the Freytech firm, and ultimately everybody will have an opportunity to hear from them in April. So we look forward to that. The next update relates to the superintendent search. The board has decided that to engage a superintendent search firm. And so we opened up a RFP, a request for proposal process. After our last board meeting, we got a number of responses. They've been vetted by our Finance and Operations Committee, and that committee will hold interviews of those various professionals before our next board meeting. And so we expect to be in a position to formally appoint a search firm at our next board meeting and really undergo the process of searching for our next permanent superintendent. And just by way of refresher, Mr. Bollendorf, his contract will expire at the end of 2024. And so, obviously now is the time to start looking for our next permanent superintendent to replace Mr. Bollendorf. The potential start date for that person could be January 1, or it may be July 1. That coincides with the academic year. So we have built some flexibility into that in terms of, we intend to advertise for, either a January 1 start date or perhaps July 1 in consideration of, any potential candidate schedules. They may be in a position where they need to provide a certain amount of notice, or they may not want to leave their district mid-year. So we have built in some flexibility in terms of a start date. Next is our budget. So this evening, well, let me take a step back. Last month, Mr. Heiser, actually it was this month, it was just 2 weeks ago, gave a budget. We had a budget workshop for Mr. Heiser gave a presentation on the state of the budget and where it was as of about 2 weeks ago. After that meeting, Mr. Heiser was kind enough to open up his office for meetings with individual board members to talk in more detail about certain things within the budget. And we are here tonight to hear from James again on where the budget is. It is balanced, I'm happy to report. And for the board to vote on submission of the budget to the county. And then if it does pass this evening, in April, there will be a budget hearing for the final approval by the board of the budget. And so that's all I have from the board level. Usually Joe provides a superintendent update, but obviously he's not here this evening. And on our agenda is the budget introduction presentation, but I think it makes more sense to move that to later on in our agenda when the board is actually voting on it. So James, if you're okay with it, I'll push your presentation just a few minutes, and we'll hear from you when the budget is up for the board's consideration. So next, is that okay? Great. So next is our first public comment section, and this section is for the purpose of public comment on agenda items that the board is voting on tonight. We'd ask that you limit your comment to about 3 minutes. The ground rules are set forth in the agenda. If you choose to make a comment, please approach the microphone, state your name and address. And with that, can I get a motion to open public comment?
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. If you'd like to make a public comment on agenda items, now's the time to approach the microphone. Okay. And may I get a motion to close public comment? All in favor? Thank you. We'll now move on to our board committee reports. And first up is the ad hoc committee on housing development, which did not meet this month. I don't know when we will have our next meeting. Probably not before our April board meeting, but I'll reach out to the committee to schedule something. Next is communications. Melissa?
We also did not meet this month, and I believe our next meeting it's actually late April this year. This month. And I don't have the date offhand, but I'll remind everybody as it gets closer.
Thank you. Next is curriculum. Thank you, James.
The curriculum committee met on March 8th. Board members in attendance were myself, Jacqueline Barnes, Brooke Myatt, and Cheryl McCopolis. Administration was Dr. Benton and Mr. Bollendorf. Our first item on the agenda was the ELA pilot programs. We discussed additional novels for English 1, 2, and 3. Next, we discussed Into Literature for grades 6 through 8. These were full novel studies of approved excerpted pieces from the current curriculum. I was just folding in the full novel to the curriculum. Next up, we discussed the world language programming, which included an ASL posting and alternative offerings to ASL. Then we discussed field trips. The Philadelphia Art Museum was the new field trip that was up for approval on tonight's agenda. We then discussed the budget and budget requests related to Goal 1. We discussed new position requests and the various tiered supports. And then finally, we discussed instructional delivery by volunteers, which was instruction from outside groups. That's all.
Great. Thank you. Any questions for Danielle? Okay, next is finance and operations. Mick.
So our committee actually met twice already this month, and we have one more meeting coming up. But we were pretty productive, I think, in all of them. So we started off our March 5th meeting, which was attended by Cheryl McCopolis, Claudine Morano, Jacqueline Barnes, and me, administrators there, Bollendorf, Mr. Bollendorf, Heiser, Airy, and Dr. Benton. So let's see, we started with the calendar update. We went through some of the different options that were available to us, and that calendar will be part of the agenda this evening. We talked about using the municipal process to dispose of some old buses, and subsequently we found out that some very old iPads were going to be added into that opportunity to sell those to raise a little bit of money for the district. We approved a girls lacrosse tournament trip to Connecticut, but then talked about issues around transportation costs there, and talked about maybe having policy take a look at that at a closer level. We had a referendum update where we had a presentation from our architects. They had, by that point, visited all of the buildings, mapped things like the roof to let us know which portions of the roof were still under warranty, which weren't. Started to create priority lists with cost estimates, and that presentation from the architects is available to other board members who weren't at this meeting. We talked about different pieces about construction, potentially, if there is a referendum, and how the differences in cost reimbursements between new construction versus modification. And then we talked about maybe how we could best position any potential referendum to minimize the tax impact on the community, and then discussed how we would look to get help with the communication pieces with the community, talking with a firm that could help us with that. Mr. Heiser then gave us a presentation about possibility of refunding or refinancing some of our existing debt. Also something that would be advantageous to the district. And then we had an update, a preview of the budget presentation that was done at the special board meeting about the budget. We talked about our ongoing CUSAC review and some of the things that may impact our final score, and then had an update on our negotiations with ESF for the contract for them to use our facility in the summer. So that was basically everything in that meeting. I'll mention the second meeting that we had was really just to get an update on the budget and to talk about the superintendent search process. The budget update, and we'll go into this more later, but basically we were closer to getting a balanced budget at that point. This was back on March 15th. And talked about some of the things just to make it clear that even though we had a lot of increased revenues, we had some expenditures, especially insurance, that went up significantly and basically ate up a lot of our increases. But as was mentioned earlier, Mr. Heiser has worked with his colleagues to help get to a balanced budget. So that's great to know. The superintendent search firms, there were 3, as was mentioned before. We narrowed it down to 2 based on what we saw in the presentations, but intend to, as Mr. Villanueva mentioned, do interviews with 2 of the organizations, New Jersey School Boards Association and then McPherson and Jacobson LLC. Those are the 2 that we'll do interviews with. That meeting is coming up on March 28th, and we will report back to the full board as to what we think, what our suggestion would be for the full board to consider. So our next meeting, as I mentioned, will be on March 28th. So any questions or comments? Thanks.
Policy Committee met on March 12th. Who was in attendance? Mark Villanueva, Melissa Arcaro Burns, Jill Fallows Macaluso, myself, Mr. Bollendorf, and Dr. Benton. After coming off of the revisions of some of the policies that we recently adopted, we kind of are looking at other sections of our policies that need to be revisited. I mentioned at the last board meeting, we're now in the 5,000 series. We're looking at our student discipline, code of conduct, cell phone use, and let's say substance abuse policies, particularly in the high school, but also in the middle school as well. We've already started a deep dive on substance abuse. The high school administration and central administration are working on some revisions, and then we'll be hopefully proposing some version of that in the next month or 2. The other part that we really wanted to focus on is that ensure that there's a process within the administration when we adopt policies of communicating the new changes to the entities that it affects, whether internal or external, and that there's a process in place that ensures that everybody's aware. I think that, we could do a better job at that. And so part of our policy agenda, we're going to keep on our agenda an update to find out from administration how that implementation operationalizing, right, is going. And let's see, as far as our next meeting is April 16th. That's it.
Great. Any questions for Claudine or Mick? All right. Any off-board committee updates?
I just have for Special Education Advocacy Council. The next meeting is next Thursday, March 28th at 9:30 in the Star Center at the high school. And there is going to be a presenter from the Morristown Police Department to discuss the issues that face children with special needs and their interaction and relationship with law enforcement, and also more general safety for those children, especially in town. So if you can make it out, it should be a great presentation. There is a virtual link on the Facebook page, but they are suggesting that if you can come and attend live, that you do so. If anyone has any questions, reach out to Angie Silveri. She is the president, and you can contact her via the Facebook page as well.
Anyone else? All right, I'm not, oh, go ahead.
Yep, I'm just trying to make, there it goes. Sorry about that. Good evening, everyone. I am going to report on the More Arts Committee. The hottest ticket in town Friday and Saturday is Matilda Jr. at the UES. More Arts will be selling concessions and candygrams. I know it's very exciting in my household. I have both of my children are in it, so please make your way out to see it. The times are Friday for 4:30 p.m. and a 7 p.m. and a Saturday 11:30 a.m. and a 2:30 p.m. Also, More Arts is hosting a night of comedy at the Community House. That's going to be Thursday, April 11th at 7:30 p.m. And remember, all these proceeds are all donated to teacher grants and scholarships in the Morristown Public Schools. And also later in the meeting, you're going to be seeing some of the wonderful items that have, with those proceeds that are being donated to our schools. Thank you.
Thanks, Brooke. Anyone else? Okay. Moving on to the business of the board. Section 8 of the agenda is reports to the board, including approval of budget transfers and bills. May I please get a motion for the approval of items 1 through 5 set forth in that section of the agenda? Second?
Second.
All in favor? Oh, hold on. Any comments or questions? All in favor? Any noes or abstentions? Thank you. Next, Article 9, the recommendations of the superintendent, which includes the 2024 to 2025 school calendar. That's a standalone item. May I please get a motion for the approval of the calendar? Any comments or questions? I'll just say thank you to everyone that was involved in preparing the calendar. It's a committee that administration puts together, full of various stakeholders within the district, and I know that a lot of work goes into putting that together. I only attended one of those meetings, but I can tell you that it is remarkable how much work and effort and time goes into figuring out where the 186 staff days and 182 student days will fit between Labor Day and late June. So thank you to everybody involved in that. May I please get a vote? All in favor? Aye. Any noes or abstentions? Thank you. Letter B, the educational program. May I please get approval for items 1 through 4 set forth in that section of the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any noes or abstentions? Thank you. Next is the refunding bond ordinance. And may I please get a motion to open the public hearing on this bond ordinance?
So moved.
Any comments or questions? All in favor? And then James, I'm going to turn the floor over to you.
Absolutely. So before we go into public comment, if there is any, a little bit of background on ultimately what we are doing here. The board is proposing to refinance all or a portion of our outstanding 2014 school bonds, which are maturing July 15th, 2025 through July 15th, 2036. The intent is to sell these refunding bonds. It's similar to the process that, some are familiar with ultimately getting lower interest rates on your home and refinancing your mortgage. So the intent is to sell the bonds at a lower interest rate and use those proceeds to pay off the 2014 outstanding school bonds, which are at a higher rate. That will produce direct tax savings to the community. The refunding bonds would be paid off in accordance with the original term of the 2014 school bonds and not extended. The board will take level substantially savings over the remaining life of the bonds. You can only proceed in this transaction if it produces a minimum net present value savings of 3%. So there is security in doing so. We are required to conduct a public hearing on it. So if there are any comments, now would be the time. And this is a similar process to what we did back, some might recall, we did this process in 2021. And I do have a slide in my budget workshop and ultimately my introduction tonight that shows those savings that can be had.
Okay, so seeing no public comment or questions, does anybody on the board have any comments or questions about this this refunding ordinance? Great. May I please get a motion to close the public hearing on the ordinance? All in favor? Any noes or abstentions? No. Okay. May I please get a motion for the approval of the resolution approving the refunding bond ordinance on second reading? Any comments or questions? All in favor? Oh,
This is
roll call vote, please.
Ms. Arcaro Burns. Mrs. Barnes. Mrs. Fowles Macaluso. Dr. Myatt. Mrs. Miller. Mrs. Morano. Mr. Weeks.
Yes.
Mrs. McCopolis.
Yes.
Mr. Villanueva.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we have a resolution for the bond form and sale as set forth in item 5 of the agenda. May I get a motion for approval of that resolution?
So moved.
Any comments or questions? This is another roll call vote.
Ms. Arcaro Burns.
Yes.
Mrs. Barnes. Mrs. Fowles Macaluso. Dr. Myatt. Mrs. Miller. Mrs. Morano. Mr. Weeks.
Yes.
Mrs. McCopolis.
Yes.
Mr. Villanueva.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our agenda is finance and business.
Budget presentation.
Okay. And I guess I should open up, right, just get a motion first before you do the presentation.
Yeah, you could. Yeah. Or we could do the presentation and then get.
Why don't we do
motion
that?
for-
Why don't we do that? So before we move for the approval of the budget, Mr. Heiser will give us an update and a presentation on the budget, and then at that point, we can vote on it.
Pull up the projector when you have a second. All set? All right. Thank you, Colleen. I don't believe that the clicker is going to work from over here, so I might ask you to go slide by slide for me. Thank you. So thank you, board members. Obviously, the budget is quite a heavy lift, and want to start out by thanking you for your support throughout that process. So a couple of things, this presentation is going to be a little bit different than the workshop. The workshop is obviously a little bit more detailed and in the weeds because we're still very much in the process. As Mr. Villanueva indicated, we are at a balanced budget that we are introducing right now. And ultimately, we are asking for the board's approval to submit this budget to the county for county review. That county review is a very thorough process that includes the county director of curriculum, the county superintendent, the county business official, and their teams. They go through the budget and inquire with any questions to us that they may have. So Colleen, can you go to the next slide? So our agenda for tonight, we're going to discuss some of the need-based goals for budgetary alignment, our budgetary challenges, because while, as Mr. Villanueva indicated, and I believe it was Mr. Weeks, while we do have additional sources of revenue, this budget was a very challenging process. What are our largest revenue sources? Our tax levy, our state aid, our fund balance, and some of our other sources of revenues. Our biggest drivers in appropriations. What adjustments have we made since our budget workshop, which feels like forever ago, but it was just 2 weeks ago. Some of our department highlights, and ultimately the budget that we are introducing, the tax impact of that budget. And then I'll talk a little bit about the last bond refunding that we did, and hopefully we will have the same outcome with the refunding ordinance that we ultimately just approved. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the goals that we chose for our budgetary alignment, and this was done through stakeholder engagement, through ultimately our district. So goal 1, maintain multi-tiered systems of supports to continue to identify and address the needs of students across a range of learning and developmental profiles. Later on in the budget, you will see how some of our initiatives and some of the highlights tie back to these goals. And goal 2, expand upon district security and operational initiatives around infrastructure, personnel, technology, and procedural efficiencies that prepare the district for future demands. Can you hit enter one more time on this? So some of the budgetary challenges. So when we first started the budget process, and when you look at it on its surface, you will see that there are additional revenue sources in this budget for 24-25. So if we look at those additional revenue sources and we say, all right, we have a levy increase of a little over $1.4 million. That's a 2% levy increase. Our state aid increase came in at $835,000. I have a future slide that shows, obviously there's been a lot of discussion about what's called S2 legislation that is out there. Moorestown as a district is on the winning side of S2, meaning that over that phase-in period, we were seeing additional funds from state aid, which is good because when you look at the funding formula in accordance with the state's formula, the state was not funding in accordance with that formula. They were underfunding districts. There's a later slide that will show we are now fully funded in accordance with the state's formula. Insurance dividends. These are dividends that are set aside in our insurance pools when we have significant increases in insurance that we can draw down upon. So ultimately, we're looking at a total increase of almost $3.4 million of revenue sources. That's great news. That's great, but when you consider the other side of it, and if you hit enter, Colleen, or click. Right? There we go. So these are just 4 lines within the budget ultimately, 4 categories, shall I say, because obviously we have multiple lines with these. So our health benefits had a 10.18% increase. That amounts to 1.418. That takes off your 2% levy increase right off the board. Your 2% levy increase went away just with your health benefit increase. Our general lines of insurance was a 9.3% increase. That's $97,000. Our contracted salaries, that's our district-wide salaries, they're going up by $2.1 million. Our CPI increases, that is consumer price index. So that's the price at which we can renew certain contracts. What contracts would that be? Custodial contracts, grounds contracts, transportation contracts, we can renew those contracts at 5.81%. That number comes straight from the state. That amounts to a $143,000 increase. So before we even consider an additional item within this budget, we're starting out $400,000 in the hole just from these items. That is a that's a significant challenge to overcome through this process. If you hit enter one more time, Colleen, I believe it will show the excess. So we started out right there, $397,000 in the hole before we even consider anything else. So it's a challenge to overcome that. Ultimately, we got to a space where we are overcoming that without having to have significant cuts and significant losses of programming or staffing. Can you go to the next slide, please? So our revenues. Our revenues consist primarily of our local tax levy. We have a 2% increase in this budget on our tax levy, which is a little over $1.4 million. Our state aid, we talked about that. We initially budgeted that flat, but it actually came in at a $835,000 increase, which is great. Budgeted fund balance, this is a very confusing wording to ultimately say whatever is left over that we do not spend in a budget has to statutorily go back in as a revenue source in a future year to offset tax increases. So if you don't fully expend your budget, the amount that's left over goes back into the budget in the next subsequent budget cycle to offset tax increases. So you want that number to stay relatively flat, and that's ultimately what we have there. So that's good. Other revenue sources, we're projecting a $993,000 increase. That's primarily fueled by drawing down on those SHIF and JIF dividends. And I will probably utilize a lot of acronyms. SHIF stands for School Health Insurance Funds. That's how we purchase our health insurance. We collaborate with other districts to pool our resources and ultimately get better rates. And JIF stands for Joint Insurance Funds. So my apologies. Next slide, please. So our revenues and our tax levy. Our tax levy is composed of two different pieces. You have your general fund and you have your debt service fund. Your general fund is everything that we do as a district to educate students ultimately. That's everything from the lights on, heating the buildings, salaries for the teacher in the classroom, everything that we do to educate the student. Our debt service fund is everything, all of our outstanding long-term debt that has ultimately been previously approved in a bond referendum that we have to pay back, obviously. So that's part of the refunding ordinance that we just did. So looking at that for 24-25, we're going up 2% on the general fund levy, but we see a little bit of a decrease of 0.18% on the debt service fund. We do have some debt that is kicking up, and later in the life of debt, typically you see it go up, but we've been able to minimize debt going up by refinancing ultimately. And your ratables, that's the tax basis over which we apply those taxes. So we do have a slight decline expected in ratables. That is mainly due to tax appeals associated with the Morristown Mall. So you can see there that the effective tax rate is approximately 1.85%. Next slide, please. So our state aid. So this, we've been tracking this obviously over multiple years. You see 7 years there. S2 was designed to be implemented across 7 years. And that's the 7-year data right there. So in past years and slides, I've always said that we wanted to see that blue line touch the green line because that means that our uncapped aid equals our state aid, and that means that the state is fully funding in accordance with the funding formula. We are officially there. So that is great news. That is what S2 was designed to do. You will obviously hear about districts, you know, Cherry Hill lost substantial amounts of money, Lenape, Rancocas Valley, several districts across the state. That is what S2 was designed to do. Next slide. So before we get into appropriations and what's in appropriations, this is ultimately how we spend our money. So this is our 2022-2023 total expenditures. It's from 22-23 because that's the last year that we have that was under audit. Obviously, we're still operating 23-24. But you can see the bulk of our expenditures is primarily salaries and benefits, 20% in benefits and 63%, I think that says, in salaries. And then from there, transportation, supplies, energy, our maintenance, our custodial security, and other. So the primary driving factor behind what we spend our money on is obviously the people that are educating our students and the benefits associated with that. Next slide. So for next year, we will be in year 3 of 3 with our Morristown Education Association contract. We'll be in year 2 of 3 with our administrators contract. Insurance, as I indicated earlier, we did project a good size increase at 5%, but that number did not become finalized until late February, which makes it a challenge to close that gap in the remaining weeks. Health insurance is 10.18%. General insurance, which is our property, casualty, boiler insurance, environmental insurance, is 9.3%, and our student accident at 1%. Instructional supplies and materials, schools are given their per pupil allocations at the beginning of the budget process, and they come in those allocations. Our department budgets are curriculum, technology, administration, facilities, and transportation. Capital outlay, so obviously some things can't wait for a referendum to be repaired. We do put money aside in capital reserve and maintenance reserve for those specific needs, and you'll see in a future slide the outcome of ultimately doing that. It has enabled us to bring some state revenue with some grant opportunities back to Morristown. And minimum wage impact. We are in the final year of minimum wage's impact of increasing minimum wage, so that obviously has a direct impact on our budget. Next slide, please. So some of the adjustments that we've made since our budget workshop. So we've reviewed additional staffing requests and ultimately have been able to make further adjustments of roughly $278,000 to those requests by either finding some efficiencies in our schedules or through attrition ultimately. Department building budgets have been reduced by $694,000, and that's been that's been 100% at the department level. Our capital outlay and reserve impact, so we've reduced our capital outlay by $804,000. And then on the side of looking at how can we offset some of the capital outlay costs, we can withdraw upon our reserves, and we are choosing to do that, choosing to withdraw upon our capital reserve and our maintenance reserve to the tune of $344,000. What that will ultimately cover and what that represents is, you'll recall from the board perspective, one of the items that is on the agenda tonight is to approve an emergent capital needs grant opportunity from the state of New Jersey that is roughly $93,000. We're going to replace 2 of our aging boilers at Roberts Elementary, and we're going to utilize the cost of that will be roughly $400,000, but that $93,000 will go against that, and then the remaining amount will be drawn from capital reserve and maintenance reserve. So this is to recognize that. Our lease purchase was further reduced by $727,000, which dollar for dollar equated to $145,000 in annual payment. And dividend appropriation, we originally had $900,000 in that we were going to draw down upon those dividends. We're bumping that up to $1.15 million. Next slide, please. So at this point, I will turn it over to Dr. Benton.
Good evening. As James said, we were facing a pretty tough budget, and since the last workshop, we have made adjustments to many of our departments, including curriculum and instruction. The ultimate goal here was to be able to maintain our high-quality instruction and to continue us along in our multi-year initiatives when it comes to our curriculum adoptions, as well as implementing multi-tiered systems of supports, which both of those are related to our New Jersey student learning standards, and the requirement to provide the professional development and curricular resources that go along with those. So you can see these are kind of our big three buckets that really tie into our curricular resources and our instruction. We have been able to maintain within the budget the math curriculum adoption for grades 6 to 8 in this year, but we are spreading our K-5 math pilot out over the next year as a way that will both spread those costs over the 2 years and also give our teachers more time to be able to implement with a greater level of fidelity for, really we're talking about a 9th-grade level implementation. You also see that we're able to update our courses at the high school level, as well as we're beginning our K-5 social studies curriculum revisions at this point, but we have scaled those back. And our world language curriculum revisions, we're going to focus on the 7-12 Latin program for this year. We have been able to maintain the curricular resources that we had in the budget, and our professional development. We are going to be focusing on the things that you see there, all of which, again, are going to support our high quality instruction and the standard shifts that we have to make. Can you go to the next slide, please? Additionally, when we talk about some of our major initiatives, we continue to provide the professional development and curricular resource support for our small group and guided instruction. This has been the model that we've followed in ELA, and when I presented our district data to you, you can begin to see the growth that we're experiencing in ELA. We're now going to be focusing that same model with math. We have continued PD to address new standard shifts and classroom level academic supports. Again, this ties into both new standards in ELA and math, as well as some of the mandated standards regarding diversity inclusion, as well as the need for academic supports that happen at the classroom level. We talk about tier 1 that happen in our reading and math supports, which is tier 2, and then more intensive supports, which we refer to as tier 3. In the last budget, we did in the budget workshop, we had new staff requests, and we have had to prioritize that. What you will see that is in the budget is that we have prioritized additional staff to provide intensive supports for students with reading difficulties. And this ties back to both looking at students that have dyslexic profiles and also being able to shift students that are currently in our reading and math support programs into more appropriate support programs for the specific reading difficulties that they're having. We also have contracted services for some of the behavior supports that we are pushing into grant sources, as well as some of the continued PD. We are also shifting that into grant sources. So we were able to keep some of that in the budget by shifting that into our title grants. As well as contracted referral services for our mental health and crisis support. We talked about that's driven largely by the need to have crisis support teams in place for all districts. And then we are focusing on school practices that use positive behavior approaches that are limiting loss of instructional time and increasing student engagement for some of our at-risk populations. Next, I think that was, yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Benton. So this shows department highlights for ultimately our operations and technology departments. Our capital outlay does include various repairs and upgrades to existing sites and systems that are really district-wide routine type of repairs. It does also include a Baker HVAC replacement. So you will recall that we did submit a ROD grant application. That ROD grant application was for roughly $4.4 million of cost, which having money in our capital reserve has enabled us to ultimately bring $1.6 million back to Morristown from the state to offset some of that cost. Our Roberts boiler replacement, I stated earlier that we do have a cracked boiler section at that building that we have to repair or replace. And with the age of those boilers, they are certainly up for replacement. So we are opting to do that and utilize $93,000 worth of state funding to ultimately do so. Technology, we have our one-to-one device program, which is expansion of one-to-one iPads, replace 1 grade level of Chromebooks, and replace aging staff laptops. Certain infrastructure improvements, replacing end-of-life switches and servers. So those switches are what is called E-rate eligible. So that brings some federal money back into the district as well. Cybersecurity, we have funds allotted for recommendations from a current cybersecurity audit and expansion of EDR and MFA initiatives to ultimately enhance our security. That also helps us with insurance renewals related to cybersecurity. Security, we do have in the budget the purchase of software that will help us fully integrate digital devices in the district with automated messaging systems, door lock controls, and camera systems. And we also have a replacement of certain cameras throughout the district and additional cameras in certain areas. We'll be in year 2 of the implementation process of a new budgetary and personnel system. Transportation, I spoke earlier about some of those contract renewals at 5.81%, but we also go through the process of reviewing our driver salaries to make sure they are competitive with surrounding districts. And we do have additional cameras budgeted for ultimately purchasing cameras for our buses. Facilities maintenance, we do have in our lease purchase the replacement of 1 truck to manage an aging fleet. Staffing. So the budget does include these 3 positions. Our dyslexia therapists, which Dr. Benton spoke a little bit towards, will provide more intensive supports to students with dyslexic profiles, reading needs at elementary levels. Elementary teacher, that is solely due to enrollment levels and enrollment demands that we're seeing already as we're processing ultimately new students coming into the district, and a high school teacher. So that position is to address anticipated course requests in science and address some scheduling constraints. Ultimately, those 3 positions have a net impact on the budget of an increase of 1.0 full-time equivalent due to finding other efficiencies within scheduling or attrition. Next slide. So this is the current status of our revenue as it stands now. You can see that we have the 2% levy increase in. You can see the $835,000 coming in for additional state aid. We did opt to increase extraordinary aid budgeted by $100,000. The board will recall at our workshop that ultimately we keep a close eye on that number, but what we're seeing with the state and the amount that is reimbursed of the cost, that number is coming back down. So we are hesitant to increase that, but for this budget cycle, I think that $1 million will be just fine. Tuition, we do have a slight decrease there. That is mainly due to certain tuition that we receive from outside districts and other districts where maybe we have a seat in a certain program, but ultimately we have some kids that are ultimately graduating. So other sources for our miscellaneous income, that's where our SHIF and JIF money rests. So you see a $901,000 increase there. Revenue generation, a slight decrease. That's fueled by minimum wage impact, and we increased rates related to our EDC and our Creative Minds and summer enrichment programs. Those programs obviously bring money back into our general fund budget to offset some of the costs associated with that. So that's fueling some of that, as well as the potential elimination of shared services with Delanco for information technology. Our withdrawal from reserves, you see that noted there. That's bringing that money in from reserve to ultimately offset some of the expenditures that we'll see on the appropriation side. And our budgeted fund balance, that is the money left over from the prior year that ultimately has to go back in to offset tax increases. Next slide, please. So appropriations, and this is the annual test of your eyes. So salaries, ultimately, we have a $2.2 million increase on that line. Our benefits, we spoke about the increase of a 10.18 on our general line of insurance, which makes up the bulk of our benefits. So you can see that number is up by 7.39% ultimately. And then some of our other areas, and some of them, when you look at the percentage, they might look a little wonky. So I wanted to provide a little bit more detail about what's going on some of those lines. So under other, you'll see student tuition. You'll see that number coming down every year over the last 3 years. That's a good thing because that means fewer students are going out of district. They're either remaining in district or maybe the needs aren't as great. So that's a great thing to see. Sometimes when you create new programs in district, that comes at a cost. While you save on tuition, you may have to spend money in other areas. So you see professional fees going up a little bit. That is why that number is going up. We're bringing students back in the district, which equates to that. You also save money on potentially transportation, because the transportation to get them to an out-of-district placement, you don't have that anymore. You have it in another way. It's your own bus drivers. So that number is already in salaries, but our purchase services going down is solely because our transportation budget is ultimately budgeted for this year at a 0.5% increase compared to last year. And when you think about the outside contracts increasing by 5.81%, that's pretty successful. Professional development and travel is relatively flat. Our supplies and utilities, $3.4 million sounds like a lot in supplies. The bulk of that is made up of the lights being on in the buildings and the buildings being heated. That's our natural gas and our electricity. Some of the other expenditures, those are memberships, and some various other expenditures, our school board membership, and then capital outlay, the 2.9 million in capital outlay. That represents the Baker, our share of the Baker HVAC project and the Roberts boiler project. Next slide, please. So ultimately, the tax impact of this budget. So when we look at our 23-24 levy, that was roughly 74.6 million. Our 24-25 proposed levy is a little over 76 million. So when you apply that against our ratables, you're looking at a 1.849% impact. When you look at that on an annual basis for the average assessed home in Morristown of 461,000, the annual increase is about $200 compared to the prior year. Can you go to the next slide, please? Our debt service. So you always want to be mindful of where you stand on your debt service for all of your outstanding debt. It comes up where you have certain opportunities to refinance it. And obviously, if the market is right, you want to do so. That is what we're ultimately doing with the third bullet there, the 2014 pending refinancing. The first bullet, you'll see that that was originally issued in 2003. It was refinanced in 2012, and we just refinanced that again in 2021. The next slide will show some further savings of that, and we hope to have that same level of savings with this 2014 issuance. You also want to be mindful of the layers ultimately of your outstanding debt. Obviously, in every single one of these issuances, they were done for a reason, whether it be parking lots that were expired, roofs that were expired, HVAC, boilers, expansion of schools. 2003 was to build, the 99 issuance, no, the 2003 one was to build UES ultimately, so expansion of schools. So you want to be mindful when these are coming due, because more than likely, some of these are on 20-year notes. HVAC equipment only lasts for about 20 years. A roof only lasts for about 20 years. So as these debt issuances are coming up, it certainly means that we are typically experiencing expired equipment and end-of-life buildings. Next slide, please. So in our last debt service refinancing, ultimately, the blue line was the remaining life of that bond issuance, and the orange line, the blue line was what was due before the refinancing, and the orange line is what was due after. So obviously, it can attribute to a pretty good size of savings for the taxpayers. That issuance was about $90,000 a year that we saved on refinancing that. We do anticipate similar savings on this refunding ordinance. So hopefully we'll have some more good information come April, May, maybe as late as June. Next slide, please. I'll turn it over to the board if there are any questions from our team, and I want to thank you for your continued support.
Thank you, James and Karen. That was a very helpful presentation on top of all the meetings that we've had over the last several months to discuss the budget. I don't see any green lights from any board members, so it doesn't look like there are any questions But again, thank you. I know a tremendous amount of work and effort goes into that. I'm happy to see that notwithstanding the difficulty this year, given the revenues and expenses, in that first slide that you had identified that the increased revenue was quickly eaten by some of our expenses, that we are continuing to direct funds to growing our supports for our students. And I also appreciate the fact that, the administration, our maximum taxing authority this year was above 2%. It was 2.7%. So there is an exercise of restraint there. I know that, many, most, if not all, are leery of imposing additional tax burden. But we are not going up to our maximum taxing authority this year. So I appreciate that. With that, I think we still need a motion for the approval of items 1 and 2 in the finance and business section. May I please get a motion, please? Any comments or questions? All in favor?
This is a roll call.
Yep.
Ms. Sarkara Burns,
Yes.
Mrs. Barnes, Mrs. Fowles Macaluso,
Yes.
Dr. Myatt, Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Morano,
Yes.
Mr. Weeks,
Yes.
Mrs. McCopolis,
Yes.
Mr. Villanueva.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have items 3 through 11 in that section of the agenda. May I please get a motion for approval of those items? Any comments or questions? I would just note that we're approving a number of donations this month. We are appreciative of all of them, and I'll walk through them. There's a $2,000 donation from More Arts to be used for choral performance at Princeton University. There's a donation of a number of drums from Nancy Knight for the music class at WAMS. There's a $2,500 donation from the Friends of Herd to be used for the high school high school boys soccer team. There's a $2,303 donation from Morristown Youth Basketball Club for the high school basketball team. A donation of $2,655 from the Morristown Youth Basketball Club, again, to be used for the high school girls basketball team. A $14,000 donation from Home and School to be used for the purchase of new picnic tables at the UES. And a $100 donation from More Arts, again, for the purchase of a drum to be used for Robert's third graders. So again, thank you very much for these very generous donations. And with that, all in favor? Any noes or abstentions? Thank you. Next up is employee relations. And before I ask for a motion, there's a couple of items I wanted to note. This section of the agenda includes our approval of a number of retirements and resignations. There's 2 in particular that I wanted to note. Sue Powell, who is the principal of the UES, will be retiring at the end of this academic year. And so I know Sue has been with the district for decades, and has held various positions throughout our district. And we are very appreciative of all of the work that she has done to support our students here. I also wanted to note Tom Merschel, who was the treasurer for the district. He also was worked for the township as at some points the town manager, at some points the CFO, but also was very helpful in assisting our business and finance department. And so we will miss Tom as well. I also wanted to note that we are appointing a new assistant principal at the high school, Mariah Jackson, who is here with us this evening. I'm sorry that you're being appointed on the same night as our budget presentation, but thank you for being here. You're replacing Don Williams, who has big shoes to fill, but we are very excited, assuming the vote goes the way that we want it to. We're very excited that you're joining us. So thank you for being here. You're free to say some words if you would like to, but don't feel compelled. Great. Great. We'll look forward to having you on board. So with that, may I get a motion for the approval of items 1 through 12? Roll call vote, please.
Ms. Sarkara Burns. Mrs. Barnes. Mrs. Fowles Macaluso. Dr. Myatt. Mrs. Miller. Ms. Morano. Mr. Weeks. Mrs. McCopolis. Mr. Villanueva.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you and welcome, Ms. Jackson. Article 10 in the agenda are suspensions that are listed on Exhibit 24-275. The letter B is the superintendent's HIB report, which we reviewed in executive session in February. May I please get a motion for the approval of the HIB report? May I have a second? All in favor? Any noes or abstentions? Thank you. Our enrollment information is listed in the next section of the agenda. Is there any old business for the board? Any new business? Okay. We're now at our second public comment section. This is for public comment on anything on or off the agenda related to the school district. Same rules apply. Please keep your comments to roughly 3 minutes. It's not necessarily a Q&A session. And if you'd like to make a comment, please approach the microphone and state your name and address. May I please get a motion to open our second public comment? All in favor? All right, thank you. If you'd like to make a comment, please take the mic.
Hi, my name is Kim Warren, and I'm a teacher at the high school, and I would like to commend my colleagues at the UES. The 6th grade science teachers at the UES are erupting with excitement. Students in all 6th grade science classes recently completed a multifaceted project about volcanoes. Students ended their unit on Earth's changing surface by working in research teams to learn about one specific volcano. Each group was assigned a specific volcano and worked together to research the type of volcano formation, lava flow, eruption history, and future risks. Each group created a presentation about their volcano and built a 3D model to represent the unique features of their specific volcano. Groups presented their slideshows to the class and also explained the features of their 3D model based on their research. As a grand finale, each group erupted their volcano in the style that matched their volcano's eruption style. Very explosive eruptions were simulated with Mentos, soda, and geyser tubes. Effusive eruptions were simulated with vinegar, dish soap, food coloring, and baking soda. As spectators, the audience acted as judges panels, holding up scorecards with a score between 1 to 10. Mrs. Allen's MD students joined in the fun and came to watch the eruptions with Mrs. Ciccarelli's class. Students were so proud to have learned about their volcano, built replica models, and most of all, erupting them. Thank you to all of the 6th grade staff who helped with this wonderful project and lesson.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Valerie Oswald Love, and I teach at the high school. I would like to commend my colleagues at South Valley for the new addition to their gym. Recently, PE teacher Tara Werner applied and received an MEF grant for a new Traverse rock wall. Students of all ages and ability levels are loving learning to safely and successfully work their way across the wall. Not only is it a great addition for the physical well-being of the students, but they are also gaining great confidence to challenge themselves with difficult tasks. A huge thank you to the MEF. It has been a great addition to their school.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tracy Panetti and I teach at the high school. I would like to commend my colleagues for the following things at the high school. So on Thursday, February 22nd, students from Sean Fitzpatrick's vocational transitions class, Spring Williams and Tom Lawless's environmental science class, and Julie Schwerin and Lauren Yachenchik's environmental science class had a combined academic and social skills lesson in the cafeteria. On Monday, students from Allison Darrow's vocational transitions class, Sue Morrow's vocational transition class, and Spring Williams and Tom Wallace's environmental science classes also had combined lessons. Students were split into groups and were given the opportunity to socialize and share their experiences in science and vocational learning, all with regard to the Philadelphia Flower Show. Vocational students shared their experiences with entering the flower show and plant care with the environmental students. It was such an amazing lesson that promoted inclusion through science. Students created a poster titled United by Flowers, which was inspired by the theme of the Philadelphia Flower Show. MHS is United by Flowers. Thank you to the staff members who took the time to plan such inclusive and meaningful lessons for our students. And on Wednesday, February 28th, the English department hosted our second consecutive African American read-in to celebrate Black History Month. Every period during the school day, English classes gathered together and students read and/or performed poetry, prose, and other works of literary art. The purpose of the read-in is to celebrate African American contributions to literature. On Friday, March 8th, the MHS Choirs and Honors String Ensemble traveled to Princeton University to perform their spring concert in the historic Princeton Chapel. The students performed a program that emphasized the human experience, celebrating life and its beauty and trials. The venue served as a rich educational experience for the young musicians, allowing the students to sing repertoire composed for alike spaces. The students were honored to perform with the virtuistic organist, Mr. Eric Plutz of Princeton University, and sang in languages including German, Italian, Latin, and English. We are incredibly proud of the staff in the Fine and Performing Arts Department for seeking out such exceptional opportunities for our students. The 43rd Annual Coriel Science Fair was held this past Saturday, and a total of 14 Morristown students competed. All took either first or second place in their categories, and they are all now eligible to participate in the Delaware Valley Science Fair on April 3rd. We would like to recognize all of the staff members who install love of all things science for our students. It starts at the elementary level and continues through their academic careers in the district. Congratulations to the students and staff for their achievements, and a special thanks for Sean Watson as the club advisor. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello, my name is Melissa Painter and I teach at Roberts. I'd like to let you know about the engaging activities that my colleagues have been working on for our students. First of all, we had the fun run on Wednesday, March 13th. It was sunny and 70-degree day, although we can't take credit for that. The children had so much fun running, walking, skipping, and dancing outside. So a big thanks to all of the staff that facilitated that. Next is the Spring Book Fair, which began yesterday. The children are diving into some good books with an undersea theme, thanks to the parents. The students absolutely love our hallway decorations. And just so you know, the book fair evening that we're going to have, we'll have teachers also reading to the students and the community that visits during our book fair night. Finally, the kindergarten students are now rehearsing their upcoming spring concert. So thanks to the kindergarten staff and to Mrs. DeShong, the concerts are just a highlight in an already bright, every week is just so bright at Roberts. So, but the concerts just really stand out to me and all the staff as well. So thanks again to all the staff for making Roberts a welcoming and wonderful place to learn.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Pacey and I teach at WAMS, and I'd like to commend my colleagues at WAMS for the WAMS Spring musical Rock of Ages, which was directed by Miss Knight and Miss Neidig, was a smashing success. The talented student performers put on an amazing show. Students were also involved in all aspects of the set and props, music and lighting, and makeup and hair. Mrs. Gore's Honors LA students wrote and illustrated children's books, and they had their books published and then traveled to Baker this month to read them to the elementary school students. The Fellowship of Christian Athletes, led by Mrs. Tomaszewski, enjoyed meeting with the Philadelphia 76ers chaplain, Kevin Harvey, when he attended one of their club meetings this month. Thank you to Home and School and Mrs. Lee, who organized a presentation by Marian Blumenthal Lazan about her experiences during the Holocaust. Mrs. Lazan's presentation was the culminating activity of the Holocaust study for the 7th grade students and is a highlight even for the staff members every year to get to hear from her. And lastly, WAM students are enjoying participating in Spirit Week this week, where 7th and 8th grade students face off to show the most school spirit. Student council advisors and students planned a door decorating contest, fun dress-up theme days, and a culminating pep rally at the end of the week, which is why I'm wearing my 1999 Women's World Cup Meehan jersey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Emily Olson. I teach at Baker, and I want to commend my colleagues at Baker for the 2nd grade concert. So on February 23rd, the Baker 2nd graders, led by music specialist Kristen Zaranin, put on a wonderful winter-themed concert. They wore blue shirts with a Buddy Bear snow globe design created by computer teacher Mark Ambrosino. Highlight of the concert was when the performers threw snowballs made of fluff at the end of a song called Snow Day, Snow Day. And then the finale song, Please Let It Snow, was punctured by a few blasts of snow from the confetti cannons. And as a 2nd grade teacher, I can tell you, the kids had a blast performing. They were so excited to show their parents and be like, did you see the confetti? Meanwhile, it's everywhere. For the 5th straight year, Baker Bears participated in the One School, One Book program. Each Baker family received a copy of the Flat Stanley Class Pet Surprise. Families were asked to read and or listen to recordings of each chapter each night for 8 days, 1 chapter a night. The very spirited video recordings of each chapter were made by teachers Ann Ferrugia, Kristen Zaranin, Beth Lefferts, Kathy Nixon, Erin Kitley, Maria McBride, and Mark Ambrosino. That was a hot ticket. I could not get myself to get one of those recordings, so it's a favored thing. This reading event culminated in a bookmark design contest based on the book. The winning bookmarks were copied and distributed to all students. This school-wide reading project was supervised by media specialist Ann Ferrugia, who selected the book and created materials and questions for each chapter. Computer teacher Mark Ambrosino used his expertise to create the backgrounds for each video recording. One School, One Book has taken its place among many of the beloved traditions at Baker. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Nicole Dancy, president of Morristown Home and School. Our most recent news events: pre-K assembly at Roberts, Holocaust survivor assembly at WAMS, spring scholastic book fair is going on now. Thursday night is the parent family night from 5:30 to 7:30. Thank you to all our corporate sponsors and the community for your continued support of our schools. We hope our students had a great time during the Morristown Home and School fund runs last week. Funds raised during home and school fundraisers are utilized for items such as assemblies, author days, school technology, playground equipment, library readings, 3rd grade dance, pre-4th grade ice cream social, 5th grade carnival, 6th grade celebration, WAMS dances, outdoor student tables, chairs, and umbrellas, project graduation. Home and School will be giving 5 $1,000 scholarships to graduating Morristown High School seniors. If interested in applying, please go to morristownhsa.org/scholarships-1. Recess Runners is coming up in April for South Valley and Baker. STEAM Week Career Day in April for South Valley, Baker, and Roberts. WAM STEAM and Career Day for 7th and 8th graders in May. South Valley Beach Blanket Bingo on May 9th, weather permitting. Teacher Appreciations in May for Baker, South Valley, and Roberts. Stay up to date by visiting morristownhsa.org, Facebook at Morristown Home and School, or Instagram at Morristown HSA. Contact us anytime at info@morristownhsa.org. Join anytime MHSA membership. Your contribution makes a difference to our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, good evening. I'm Celie Coleman of 215 East Main Street, resident here in Morristown. I might have been one of the only ones who recognized a change in format of the agenda for tonight. we had a public comment section before our committee announcements or updates, and I was just wondering if that was going to be continued for upcoming Board of Education meetings. It makes it a little bit hard to ask questions or comment on things that come up in committee meetings when we don't know what was being discussed in them until after the public comment. That also brings me to a question regarding meeting minutes. I read the minutes from last meeting and was just a little bit frustrated. There seemed to be a lot of content that was left out. For instance, even just starting to discuss the 5,000 series in policy was not mentioned at all in the minutes. So if someone who missed the meeting looks at that meeting minutes, they have no idea what's going on in policy. But I'm happy to hear tonight that we are reviewing that. Things are moving forward. It's just, again, very difficult to sort of follow what's going on. I try very hard and it's hard for me. So I can't imagine people who might not have as much time or are just coming into the district, what they struggle to understand about our whole system here. So I'm hoping that we can look at that, come up with a better system. The transcription seems dated as well. And then regarding the 5,000 series policy, I was just wondering, you mentioned last month that you would be including parents and students in making some of those changes or recommendations for changes. And I was just wondering if that was happening or if there's a plan or how people can find out when that is occurring. Thanks.
Any other public comment? Motion to close public comment?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Anything for the good of the order? All right. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.